How's it going today, everybody? It is a common take of people in this hobby that sports cards really boomed and blossomed with COVID. And although that is oftentimes true, depending on how you look at it, I want to dive into a chapter of the Diamondbacks collection. I really love this book. It has a lot of great information. But I want to dive into the 2010s, the decade from 2010 to 2019, leading up to COVID-19 in 2020, where the hobby really blossomed. And in this video, I'm going to be explaining and showing you how the hobby and sports cards really started to take off well before COVID-19 hit and the hobby boomed. It began in vintage, but by the end of the decade, demand in the modern market started to pick up at a substantial rate before it exploded in 2020, which we will address a little later in this chapter. The card market started blossoming in the non-sports and TCG genres too. As the typical generational cycle was taking place, the youngsters of the 1990s were now entering their 30s and becoming nostalgic like previous generations did before them. A noticeable increase in hobby content production was evident in the 2010s. More available information often leads to increased commerce because it improves buyer confidence. This is a trend that continues today as established and emerging companies seek to provide essential intelligence to consumers. The advancement of mobile devices, namely smartphones, made the content more attainable during the decade. Like the underlying internet itself, these ever-improving data vehicles helped facilitate increased activity. As a collector, you could suddenly access or do almost anything at any time from anywhere with your fingertips. As this 10-year stretch continued, we began to see more global interest in trading card collecting, and some of it coincided with the greater international interest in sports, with basketball leading the way. There was also something brewing in the non-sports genre, with Pokemon cards leading the way. It was the perfect example of a generational cycle in full effect. The Pokemon trading card game became a nationwide phenomenon in the late 1990s, and now the kids that once drove sales for the product were reconnecting with their youth as adults. Like the gradual growth in the NBA card market across the world, Pokemon cards were being submitted for grading from the UK to Japan. By the middle of the decade, there appeared to be a shift in collector focus which started to impact the vintage card market more significantly. In the prior decade, when set building gained momentum, the star card market cooled a little. I wouldn't describe it as soft, but there were plenty of cases where prices for tough commons were the record setters everyone was talking about after an auction would close. In the 2010s, the stars were not only back in the spotlight, but they were also pulling away from the rest of the pack in dramatic fashion. The cards that are best described as beachfront property were being treated as such. This trend continues, and it's one that will remain, in my opinion. During the last few years of the 2010s, the modern card segment of the business started making a significant move. There were signs that the market conditions were improving before 2020 and the pandemic. Younger people were getting involved, and modern card issues were being given greater respect by some veteran collectors. There is a percentage of collectors out there who tend to scoff at modern card activity and prices, especially when those prices start competing with the classics, like some that are featured in this book. It is simply hard for those collectors to get their minds wrapped around it. For the record, while the modern card market has surged to unprecedented levels, the dynamic isn't exactly new. Let me explain. When large numbers of new people start entering the market, they tend to start with modern cards. There are different reasons for this, which range from the vast opportunities to open packs of new product to the relatively inexpensive options available in modern cards. But the driving force is something altogether different. In some ways, the 2010s represented the calm before the storm, but you could feel the train moving down the tracks before it became a runaway in 2020. So there you have it. As we could tell by the information in this book, the hobby really started to pick up a lot of steam in the 2010s, the decades of the 2010s. And I think that is very, very true. Yes, the calm before the storm was the decade of 2010s, where 2020 was the storm. And it is completely different to compare 2020 and the 2010s. However, the notion that sports cards weren't all too popular in the 2010s is just absolutely false. And I'm really happy to have clarified that and hopefully educate people about the 2010s decade in the sports card hobby leading up to 2020 and COVID-19. So hopefully you were able to take away a little something from this video. And if you did, I would appreciate you smashing the thumbs up button. Comment down below. Let me know what you think about the 2010s and what information was stated in this book here. I can't wait to make more videos about this, but until then, I'll see you in the next one.